are the only ones on that blank case. Mrs. Coyle stared at the little box, running her finger slowly across its contours through the plastic. It was heartbreaking to watch. This note was folded up inside, Burns pressed on. It's totally clean of prints as well. We've already taken a sample of the ink. We could get something there. I want to assure you we're putting every resource onto this. What do they want, Ron? Unlike his wife, the president was stone-faced. During the campaign, he'd been equally praised and criticized for his stoicism, or robotic quality, depending on whose story you were reading. He had been a law professor at one time, and it showed. Burns admired the man's strength in any case. He knew he couldn't have held up nearly as well under similar circumstances. His 2 daughters and his wife were his life, at least his life away from work. This is going to come as a shock, he told the first couple. But again, let me stress that we can't assume anything about this, true or false. Even now, Burns realized he was stalling the President of the United States. Finally, there was nothing left to do but lay the note flat on the table in front of them. It was only a few sentences, and they were brutally succinct. There is no ransom. There will be no demands. The price, Mr. President, is knowing that you will never see your children again. Chapter 17. Hala Adesari popped open her eyes and looked with alarm around the room. For the 4th straight morning, it took a moment, maybe 5 seconds, to remember exactly where she was. Wayfarer Hotel, Washington, America. It was strange waking to silence in such an uncomfortable foreign environment. At home, they woke to the Adhan every morning, ringing out from 24 mosques in the neighborhood. Back in their coral house with their 2 beloved children. That all seemed like somebody else's life now. Finishing up her residency, worrying about what to make for dinner, eating alone with Fahd and Amina most nights while Tariq worked late at his accounting firm. That was before he started coming home from the mosque talking about American devils and the inevitable war, any number of things Hala knew in her heart to be true. He rambled nightly about how the United States was a cancer, one that would spread and infect the entire globe if it was left unchecked. And now here they were, the Wayfarer Hotel, Washington. The previous night she had nearly killed a man on the street, a petty thief. The clock on the nightstand said 4:50. Hala slipped out from under the cheap hotel comforter and took the television remote to the foot of the bed. She sat there in her nightgown, flipping channels with the sound off so as not to wake Tariq. It was the same story everywhere. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. The Coyle kidnapping had become a national obsession, while the suicides at Dulles had already disappeared into the background. It seemed so incredibly apt to her, systematic. What were 2 dead Arabs worth here as compared to 2 white, wealthy American children? Everything had a price in this country. Everything. And these self-obsessed fools wondered why the rest of the world hated them. As to whether any of these recent events had something to do with the lack of communication from the family since they'd arrived, Hala could only guess. It had been 4 days of convenience store food and lying low in this dank hotel room, this cave, waiting for word that she'd begun to suspect might not be coming. Hala, behind her on the bed, Tariq stirred. Hala, turn it off, it only upsets you. It's always the same, she said. Every single channel, the same babble, the same video. I know, he said. That's why you should turn it off. Leave it off, my darling. She reached up to do it, but then stopped short when the light from the screen caught something on the floor. It was a glossy piece of paper, or a brochure of some kind. Someone had slipped a note under the door in the night. Even before she knew what it was, Hala's pulse began to race faster. What is it? Tariq asked. When did it come? Who delivered it? It's from the Smithsonian, she said, bringing it for a better look under the bedside lamp. The Museum of Natural History. I'm sure it wasn't there before. They unfolded it on the bed. Inside, the brochure showed a map of the museum's galleries and current exhibits, but it was nothing more than any ordinary tourist might pick up. There were no instructions or additional markings of any kind. And yet, wasn't that exactly what she and Tariq were meant to be here? Just any tourists? It says they open at 10, she read off the page. For Hala, the implication was clear. First contact had finally been made. Chapter 18. This was it then. Their mission had begun. Something involving the president's missing children? That could very well be. It was odd that they would be as much in the dark as everyone else in Washington. Odd, but also brilliant, wasn't it? The family gave them only as much information as they would need to fulfill their obligations, no more, no less. At 9:30, the Aldesaris left their hotel and walked the glass and concrete canyon of 12th Street all the way down to the National Mall. They passed through the high-column entrance of the National Museum of History just minutes after it opened, blending easily into the crowd of international tourists and school groups already clogging the galleries. This was it. But it wasn't. For the next 2 hours, they wandered in a perpetual state of anxiety and frustration. Hala passed by glass cases of preserved sea creatures and fossilized remains and African artifacts, never quite seeing any of it. She focused on the faces of the people instead, scanning for anything that might tell them why they were here. The waiting, the suspense, was becoming excruciating, almost impossible to bear. It wasn't until their 5th or 6th pass through the museum's central rotunda that something finally happened. A dark-eyed young woman with an ornate neck tattoo caught Hala's gaze from across the room. She held it for several seconds, then looked away, ostensibly taking in the enormous bull elephant that dominated the space between them. Hala stopped to regard the display, then looked back. Again the girl was staring. Was she from the family? Or was this just Hala's imagination working too hard? Tariq, she said. I see her, he said. Go. I think she wants to talk. He kept his position while his wife worked her way slowly around the room, never losing sight of the stranger. She was Saudi, presumably, but dressed like an American college student. Ripped jeans, a peasant blouse, scuffed clogs. On her shoulder she carried a brightly colored Guatemalan bag. It appeared to be full, with books, or maybe a bomb, for here, for now. As Hala reached the back of the gallery, the girl came over and spoke to her. Excuse me, she said. Do you know where the reptile hall is? Her perfect American accent was a surprise. Had this one been recruited stateside? Or, Hala suddenly wondered, was this maybe not what she'd thought? Was this girl with the police? I'm sorry, she answered. I don't know. I'm not from here. Maybe I could take a look at your map. When the girl pointed at the brochure Hala had carried from the hotel, any last doubts left her. Of course, she said, and handed it over. The girl unfolded it on top of her bag and studied it for several seconds, while a stream of waist-high children in school uniforms ran past, squealing out ridiculous laughter having something to do with the elephant's tusks. Here it is, she said finally. Reptiles. This is what I want to know more about. When she refolded the map and handed it back, something flat and hard was inside that hadn't been there before. Hala looked down to see the silver edge of a disc tucked into the folds of laminated paper. It sent a quickening sensation up her spine. Thanks a lot, the girl said in a familiar American sing-song style. She smiled vacantly, then turned and walked away without once looking back. No, Hala said too quietly to be heard by anyone but herself. Thank you, and thank Allah.
Chapter 19. Police work isn't usually about surprises. It's more about routines. This was completely different. Something incredibly strange was going on. Not all bad, necessarily, but strange. It was like no case I'd ever worked before or come across. One of the special agents in Ned Mahoney's unit at the Bureau called me on Monday morning and said he wanted to send over some files. Files, I said. Like, just any files? Some re-interviews from the Coyle investigation we'd like to get your take on, he said. After days of being totally shut out, this request felt random, even disorganized on the part of the Bureau. I tried calling Ned Mahoney several times that morning, but all I got was his voicemail. It didn't make sense. Why would he pull me in and avoid me at the same time? Or was I just being paranoid? When the courier came, I expected at least one of those files to be about Ray Pinkney, the van driver I had already interviewed. Instead, what I got was a thick stack of second and third tier leads, which I guess made me the Bureau's newest second or third tier gopher. What the hell was that all about? They just want to keep an eye on you, sugar, Sampson said in the car on the way to the first interview. This is the Bureau's version of a short leash. You're officially on it now. I guess I am too. He was probably right. John's always good for a dose of perspective and common sense, which is why I wanted him along. I hadn't asked anyone's permission to bring a partner, but as we say in the business, fuck that. I've seen this woman on TV, Sampson said. He was looking over the files on his lap while I drove. Don't think it was BET. Probably not, I said, more like MSNBC or maybe Meet the Press. Isabel Morris had been the scheduled speaker at the Braniff School on the morning of the kidnapping. Her field was U.S. Middle East policy, and she was a regular fixture on the Sunday morning talk circuit. Obviously, some part of that equation was enough for the Bureau to keep her on their radar, and now she was on mine. When we pulled up to her red stone townhouse on Calvert Street, a Grand Marquis was parked out front with a suit behind the wheel and a big Starbucks cup on the dash. I didn't recognize the agent, but he gave us a nod as we started up the front steps. Good luck, he called out. Why? Am I going to need it? I asked. But he just grinned, shook his head, and went back to slurping his coffee. Chapter 20. Do you believe that frickin' guy drinking frickin' lattes down there? I mean, 24 hours a day he's parked in front of my house, him or one of his moron cronies. Really? Really? All the criminal possibilities in the world. This is how you people want to spend your resources? Is that supposed to impress me somehow? Or maybe just keep me from slipping out of the country? Those were Isabel Morris's first words to us, delivered rapid fire, starting more or less the second she'd opened the door. She was shorter than I expected, maybe 5'1" or less. On TV, she was always just a talking head, which I guess was still the case here. Ms. Morris, I'm Detective Cross. We spoke briefly on the phone, I said. This is Detective Sampson. Can we talk inside, out of the glare of the FBI? I think that might be better. Please? She stared at me a little, but then stepped back to let us in. We followed her through the house to a kitchen and family room at the back, with a glass-walled breakfast nook looking out to a brambly garden. A teenage boy on the couch was playing Mortal something or other with headphones on, and he never even looked over at us. Miss Morris went straight to the stove, turned down the flame under a steaming double boiler, and then started chopping a pile of red peppers on the butcher block counter. When I realized she was playing balls in your court with me, I jumped in. Miss Morris, Isabel, she said. I know you don't want us here right now. Can't blame you. But you can at least understand why the Bureau and police might be interested in you? She stopped chopping and looked up at the ceiling. Let's see here. Because I'm on MSNBC more than Fox? Because I worked for the Fulani campaign in the 90s? Or maybe because I dared to criticize the Coyle administration for egregious mistakes they themselves have admitted making in Afghanistan and Pakistan? Is that the kind of thing you mean? Yes, actually, I said, all of which is irrelevant to why I'm here. I need to get a statement from you about the night before, morning of, and afternoon following Zoe and Ethan's disappearance. So you can look for inconsistencies, she said. Not me, I said, but someone, yes. That's the general idea. Unbelievable, she said. The FBI and the D.C. police have no clue where those poor kids are, so they keep up the witch hunt with people like me, just to be able to say they're doing something, and you're comfortable with this. I didn't say that, I told her. I think you satisfy certain criteria as a person of interest, and I think that's as far as anybody's gone in an analysis of you. The Bureau has an amazing machine over there, but emphasis is definitely on the machine. Sometimes, anyway. Meanwhile, 2 kids are missing. Can we please focus on that? She was squinting at me now, almost like I'd gone out of focus. I don't think she expected any of that to come out of a cop's mouth. Haven't I seen you on the news before? She said then. I think I have. Probably, Sampson told her. He's about half famous. Isabel Morris smiled, sort of. Just like